Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everybody to the Breathing for Energy virtual event. I am incredibly excited. I have an absolutely power-packed presentation for you with some really cutting edge science that very few people, including very few doctors and health practitioners, are even aware of. This is really powerful information. And this is not just going to be a bunch of fluff, or it's not just going to be a bunch of fluff and a sales pitch. My goal here is to give you a ton of actual practical value that has the potential to change your life. And I'm going to give that to you for free in this presentation. So this is the new science of breathing, how to supercharge your energy levels, hyperoxygenate your cells, and rewire your brain to eliminate stress and anxiety. These are big promises, and I plan on living up to them. So make sure you stick around all the way to the end. So just a little about me in case you're not familiar with me already. In 2020, I was voted the #1 health influencer by the Mindshare Wellness and Functional Medicine community. This is the biggest natural health community of functional medicine doctors and natural health practitioners. And this was an enormous honor for me to be voted the #1 health influencer of 2020. So I put that at the top of the list because right now it's the thing I'm most proud of. I'm a 2-time best-selling author. I have a bachelor's in kinesiology from San Diego State University. I've completed my coursework for my PhD in clinical psychology. I've got advanced certifications in nutrition, fitness, athletic training, and more. I'm the creator of the Energy Blueprint and the founder of the Energy Blueprint podcast. And most importantly, I have been obsessed with studying health science and teaching health science since I was a very little kid, since I was about 12 years old. So we're going on 25 years now. These are this is one of my books, the Ultimate Guide to Red Light Therapy, that came out a couple years ago. I got another book coming out shortly in a few months called Eat for Energy. It's all about how to optimize your nutrition for energy levels. And then the Energy Blueprint podcast. So enough about me. Here's what you are going to learn in this webinar. First, we're going to do a simple 1-minute body vitality test to see how well you're delivering oxygen to your cells. Also, this is the single best test that I've ever found for measuring and tracking your energy levels. It's simple, it's very easy to do, and it is absolutely profound. Number 2, why dysfunctional breathing is the single biggest and hidden contributor to energy and anxiety problems. And we're going to talk about the keys to fixing it. Number 3, we're going to talk about the single fastest way to reduce anxiety in the brain ever discovered. We're going to talk about a huge myth about breathing. Number 5, the specific breath training that is the single fastest and most powerful strategy for improving energy levels that I've discovered in 25 years. Number 6, the secret key to beating chronic anxiety. Hint, it's not a mind-based technique. And 7, a simple daily 10-minute practice that can double your energy levels in just a few weeks. So this is what we're going to be talking about and more. So let's get straight into it. So first is the 1-minute BOLT score. And I want you to do this every single morning. It takes less than a minute to do, and it is absolutely one of the key metrics to track for your health. I love this quote from James Nestor, who wrote a wonderful book called Breath, New York Times bestseller, excellent information in the book. I highly recommend it. What he said is, no matter what we eat, how much we exercise, how skinny or young or wise we are, none of it will matter unless we're breathing correctly. Breathing is huge. And one of the other keys that most people are unaware of, this is sort of a hidden thing that almost everybody in the general public, but even most health practitioners and doctors are totally unaware of, which is that most people, the vast majority of people, have chronically dysfunctional breathing habits. Their normal breathing habits that they don't perceive anything wrong with are actually dysfunctional, and they've been wired in a dysfunctional way. And we're going to talk about why that happens. So here's this test. It's called the Body Oxygen Level Test, or the BOLT test. This test tells you if your breathing is optimal or dysfunctional. It also shows you your CO2, your carbon dioxide tolerance, which is a critically important metric, and we're going to talk about why it's so important. It shows you your oxygen extraction and utilization efficiency, and it's a proxy for measuring your overall energy levels. And number 5, it gives you an objective test to track your progress, to track your health, to track your body's energy and vitality. Now, to go back to number 4, just for a second, if I can digress for a moment, we'd like to think, given the state of science, we can put a man on the moon, for example. We've done amazing achievements with modern science, and yet, if I ask any doctor, including the world's top fatigue specialists, hey, what's the best test for telling a person or measuring someone's energy levels? They would probably be stumped, and they wouldn't have any really clear answer. So, you can run huge numbers of tests. There are hundreds of tests you can run. You can run tests for hormone levels. You can run tests that measure oxidative stress. You can run tests for, cortisol and testosterone and estrogen and gut health and microbiome and, standard blood panels and CRP and inflammation. And you can run a million different things. But there isn't really one test that reliably and predictably correlates with energy levels. This test, I found, does reliably and predictably correlate with your energy levels. So it's a profound test to do to track your body's own vitality and to track progress as you implement different methods or different practices in your life. So here's how to do this test. We're going to do it together. And I'm going to put on a timer that's going to count. So a few things that you need to be aware of in order to do this test properly. This is essentially a breath hold test. However, it is not a maximal breath hold test. So there's 2 key differences. One is we're not going to do a maximal inhale where we go and then hold. And we're also not going to hold until, the absolute limit of when we can hold no longer. Okay, we're going to hold actually after an exhale, after a normal exhale, not a full complete exhale, but after a normal exhale, we're going to pinch our nose and hold our breath. And we're going to wait not until our absolute limit, when we can push ourselves no more, but we're going to wait until the first urge to breathe. Okay, so the first signs of discomfort, that might be just a feeling of discomfort and air hunger and a desire to open your mouth and get air, or it could be contractions of the diaphragm or breathing muscles, something like that, something that is your first urge to breathe. Okay, and importantly, how you can know if you push too hard is if your breathing is really hard, is really big. If you have to take big breaths after the breath hold, that means you did it too long. So if after the breath hold you go, that means you did it too long. Your breathing should go right back pretty much into normal breathing. What we're going to do is we're going to take just a few normal breaths. So you can go in and out of the nose, just a few calm, normal breaths. Don't take really deep, big breaths, just normal breaths, whatever your normal breathing pattern is. Okay. And then after the next exhale, after a normal exhale, you don't have to force out all your air. Just after a normal exhale, you're going to pinch your nose, close your mouth, and hold your breath. And then I'm going to turn on this timer. Okay, so a couple more breaths, and then we're going to do it. Ready? And one more breath. And go. Okay, I suspect pretty much everyone is done, and maybe most of you probably were done somewhere around between 15 to 25 seconds or so. Here's how you know if you did it too long, if you held too long past the first urge to breathe. Again, if your breathing was really heavy, if after that hold you had to go and you had those heavy breaths, that means you did more of a maximal breath hold time rather than a BOLT test. Okay, so the BOLT test is to the first urge to breathe. Here is how this test works. When you hold your breath, you have no oxygen entering into your lungs and no CO2, no carbon dioxide, can leave your lung. Oxygen levels in your blood drop and CO2 levels rise. So how quick you feel the urge to breathe is a reflection of your body's efficiency at extracting and utilizing oxygen to produce energy and your CO2 sensitivity. Okay, really important concept. It'll make more sense as we go on. Now, many years ago, there was a very well-known exercise physiology book that talked about this test. And what they found consistently is that healthy young people consistently have at least about a 40-second BOLT score. Okay, comfortably holding the breath before the first urge to breathe is at least 40 seconds. That is what has been defined by actual scientists as what is associated with good health. Okay. However, the vast majority of people, including a lot of athletes, actually have a comfortable BOLT score of often less than 20 or 25 seconds. But to achieve your full potential as far as your energy levels and for your nervous system to be operating properly, as well as for fitness and performance during physical activity, at least 40 seconds should be your goal. Now, let me show you what this translates to as far as a breathing pattern. So when you have a low BOLT score, your breathing pattern will be fundamentally different than if you have a high BOLT score. So a BOLT score of 10 seconds looks something like this. These lines here are going up. This is the inhale, and this is the exhale going down here. Okay. Now, in contrast, if you have 20 seconds, you can see that here it takes longer to do each breath, and there's less volume of air going in and out. Let me show you that again at 10, and this is 20. Okay, so two key differences that you're noting. There's fewer breaths that are occurring over the same period of time, and there's less air moving in and out. I know that's kind of maybe counterintuitive. We're going to talk about that. If you have 30 seconds, it's even more so that way, even lighter and even fewer breaths over this period of time. And if you have 40 seconds and beyond, then you have ultralight breathing. You have barely noticeable breathing where it's taking a very long time to do each breath. You've got a pause of several seconds between each breath, and you've got pretty minimal amounts of air moving in and out of your lungs while you're at rest. Okay. So again, there's fundamental differences in how someone is wired to breathe, literally how their brain and nervous system are regulating their breathing pattern, how fast they're breathing and how much air they're taking in and pushing out with each breath based on that BOLT score. That BOLT score tells you about your breathing frequency and breathing volume. So what does this say about you? Well, for one, it tells you a lot about your sports performance. Okay, higher BOLT scores are critical for performing optimally during physical activity. And this actually relates to the physiology being able to operate properly. When your BOLT score is at least 30 seconds, there's a good match between the rate of production of carbon dioxide from your cells and the elimination of carbon dioxide with your breathing. Okay, so the breathing out of carbon dioxide is matched well to the production of carbon dioxide at the cellular level. However, if you have a BOLT score lower than 30, 20 to 30, it indicates significant room for improvement and the beginnings of breathing dysfunction. If your BOLT score is less than 20 seconds, excessive breathing eliminates more carbon dioxide than the amount that is produced through exercise. And this leads to a net loss of CO2, reduced oxygen delivery, and constriction of blood vessels and airways. We're going to talk about the mechanisms of why that happens, but that's critically important to understand. The bottom line here is that if you have a Bolt score below about 25 or 20 seconds, you have significantly dysfunctional breathing. Your CO2 sensitivity is very low, and your ability to extract and utilize oxygen is not very good. Now, this also correlates to the amount of physical activity, or the type of physical activity, intensity of physical activity, I should say, that you can sustain for 30 minutes while breathing through your nose, while not having to resort to mouth breathing. So if you have a Bolt score of about 5 seconds, your ability to walk will be very limited. So these are people with very severe chronic fatigue syndrome who have difficulty even with just walking. If your Bolt score is 10 seconds, you'll have the ability to walk fairly slowly. If it's 20 seconds, you can walk at a fast pace or maybe jog slowly for 30 minutes while nasal breathing. And if it's 30, you can jog at a medium to fast pace. And if it's 40 or above, you can run fast for half an hour or more while nasal breathing, okay? In addition, very importantly for our purposes here, more so than sports performance or physical fitness, is your energy levels. Your Bolt score is, as I said before, the single best test to gain insight into your body's overall vitality and energy levels. Low Bolt scores reliably and predictably correlate with people who are chronically fatigued. And high Bolt scores correlate with high energy levels and healthy physiology. Again, anything below 25 seconds on a Bolt score test indicates dysfunctional breathing habits have been wired into your nervous system. Now, here's the big key that I want you to understand. Every time you practice the stuff that I'm going to show you in this presentation, you will feel better and have more energy every time you improve your Bolt score by 5 seconds. So this is a simple test you can do every single day. You can track this. It's an objective way to gauge your body's vitality and to gain insight into what's going on with your physiology at the cellular level. And every time that you are, from day to day over the weeks, if you are tracking and you find an improvement of 5 seconds, what you're going to notice is that translated in a big way into increased energy levels. Your physiology is, your cells are literally producing energy and utilizing oxygen, extracting oxygen, utilizing it to produce energy more efficiently, okay? If you take your Bolt score from 10 to 25 up to 40 and beyond, you will absolutely see huge improvements in your energy levels as well as your anxiety levels. Okay, so how do you improve this? Well, we're going to get to that. We're going to cover the specific methods of how you actually improve your Bolt score. But first, I want you to just commit to actually tracking this. So take it daily, first thing in the morning. As soon as you wake up, you can take your Bolt score. Again, it takes less than a minute. Write down your Bolt score. So just have a little piece of paper and have 3 columns. So you have your Bolt score for that date, and rate your energy level on a scale of 1 to 10, and rate your level of anxiety or tension. So you have those 3 columns of, you're writing your Bolt score, let's say it's 25, and then next to it, you write, I'm a 5 or a 6 out of 10 on energy, and I'm a 7 or an 8 in terms of my anxiety level. Okay, and then what you want to do is track the trend in how improved Bolt scores leads to improved energy and mood. Okay, and you will absolutely see a profound correlation. As you increase that Bolt score, you're going to increase your energy, decrease your anxiety, and you're going to feel a lot better. You're going to change your physiology in a very profound way. So let's talk about some of the keys of how we actually improve our Bolt score. The energy key number 2 is optimize your breathing for deep oxygenation of your cells. The first big key is this, and this is the piece of advice that is very, very common in breathing, in meditation circles, in yoga circles, and even some breathing courses, where they teach you to take deep breaths. And they teach you that deep breaths, really full, deep expansions of your lungs and your belly, are optimal breathing. And this may be shocking or counterintuitive for many, many people listening to this, but this is absolutely a myth. It is false. So the commonly used practice of taking big breaths is based on the misconception that taking in more air will increase oxygen levels in your blood. We all think, if I take more breaths, I'm bringing in more oxygen and therefore I'm delivering more oxygen to my cells. This is wrong. Deep, heavy breathing is not a sign of health. It is not the optimal breathing pattern that your physiology is designed for when it's in a state of rest and in a state of good health. Breathing more, breathing deeply, forcing a lot of air in on each breath does not deliver more oxygen to your cells. I know that's counterintuitive, but I'm going to explain why. So oxygen is indeed one of the key fuels, along with typically carbohydrates and fuels, that get pulled into your cells and used by your mitochondria to produce energy. Oxygen is needed for cells to produce energy. We can measure oxygen saturation. So how much oxygen molecules are being carried around in our blood on those red blood cells. The red blood cells are what carry the oxygen around in our blood. Now, what most people need to understand is that almost everybody has an oxygen saturation between 95 to 99% at rest. This is normal and this is optimal. That's where it should be. Now, because we're already at near maximal carrying capacity for oxygen, the solution to getting more oxygen into your cells is not to get more oxygen into your blood by breathing deeper. It doesn't actually work that way. Deep breathing doesn't help because we don't actually have a deficiency in oxygen. The oxygen is there. The human body actually carries a surplus of oxygen in the blood. 75% of the oxygen that we take in on each breath is actually exhaled while we're at rest. And even when we're doing physical activity, as much as 25% of that oxygen we take in on each breath is exhaled. There is a surplus. So increasing oxygen saturation up to 100% doesn't have any added benefits. Moreover, it's not even possible. It's not possible or desirable because as the blood is traveling through the body, it's designed to drop off some of that oxygen to the cells. So the amount of oxygen that is in the blood can never and really should never be at 100%. It should be in that range of 95 to 99%. That is what's healthy. That is what's optimal. And again, we have this surplus. There isn't a deficit of oxygen in the blood. So this idea of taking in more breaths or deeper breaths to take in more oxygen, to bring more oxygen to our cells, is basically like telling an individual who's already eating enough food, eating enough calories to sustain their weight, that they need to eat more in order to produce more energy, right? The solution to producing more energy is not to take in more food. It just doesn't work that way. And in fact, it's the opposite in the case with food as well, that if you take in much more food than your body needs, it will actually cause fatigue, not more energy. Now, I want you to consider this. Of these two people here, who breathes the hardest and deepest and has the most noticeable deep breathing? Well, you probably answered the person on the right. And that is true. In general, younger, healthier people, let's imagine if you took these two people and you stood them up and had them walk, had them go for a walk. So they're walking right next to each other. They're doing the exact same physical activity. How would each of these two people be breathing? Okay. And the woman on the right has her hand on her chest to indicate, maybe some kind of speculative, obviously, but indicate some kind of dysfunction. Maybe she's got cardiovascular disease or something like that. Okay. So how would those two people be breathing as they're walking next to each other doing the exact same physical activity? Well, the person on the right here would be breathing like this, right? Fast, deep breathing. The person on the left would be breathing in a way that you probably wouldn't even be able to notice or detect their breathing. You wouldn't be able to see it in a really pronounced way or hear it in a really pronounced way. Much softer, much lighter, much slower, okay? So again, this is just to show you, to give you an indication that this idea that many people have taught, that's very commonly taught, that deep breathing is optimal breathing, is simply not true. It's actually the opposite. Chronic deep breathing and fast breathing is an indication of stress and the body's struggling to extract and utilize oxygen and produce energy efficiently. If you watch a baby, a young, healthy baby, sleeping, for example, what you'll find, and I have a 2-year-old daughter, so I'm still very much in the baby stage, and I just want to check to make sure she's breathing, of course, as a good paranoid parent. And sometimes you got to look for 30 seconds to even detect the movements of breath, because they're so slow and so light. Now, that is actually what optimal breathing is. It is light, slow breathing. That is an indication of a relaxed nervous system and a healthy body that is extracting and utilizing oxygen and producing energy efficiently. Deep, heavy breathing, the faster you breathe and the deeper you breathe, is an indication of poor health. Okay? So what is regulating this? What is controlling whether we're doing one or the other? Well, there's these two aspects of breathing, right? One is how fast you're breathing, how many breaths you take in a given unit of time. And the other is how much volume of air is in each breath. So if you contrast these two images over here, this one is faster breathing, and it's also taking in a bigger volume of air with each breath. So what is regulating this? Well, it's not oxygen, counterintuitively. It's actually primarily carbon dioxide that regulates those breathing patterns. So the rate and volume of your breathing is determined by receptors in your brain that work in a similar way to how a thermostat in your house works. When those brain receptors detect that there is a high level of carbon dioxide in the blood, and they also monitor the acidity or pH level, which is strongly influenced by carbon dioxide. When they detect that there's too much carbon dioxide, they speed up the rate of breathing and try to take in more and push out more to get rid of some of that carbon dioxide. So when levels of CO2 increase above a certain threshold, the CO2 receptors in the brain stimulate breathing to get rid of the excess CO2. And here is the big problem. CO2 is not just a waste gas that the body needs to get rid of. This is a very common misconception. I know I thought this for years growing up. We all kind of have this idea that when we breathe, we take in oxygen. Oxygen is the good stuff that our body needs. And then we produce this waste gas, carbon dioxide, that we got to breathe out and get rid of. And there's, of course, a partial truth to it. CO2 is indeed a byproduct of cellular energy production, cellular respiration, and we do need to breathe out some carbon dioxide. However, it is simply not accurate at all to conceptualize CO2 as a waste gas. It is actually the big secret to effective delivery of oxygen to your cells. So let's talk about the secrets of CO2, why it's not just a waste gas, and it's the secret key to hyperoxygenating your cells. There are 4 vital functions of CO2 in the body. One is supporting oxygen delivery to the cells. That's the big one we're going to spend time talking about. It also plays a role in dilation in the walls of airways and blood vessels. Number 3 is blood pH regulation, as I just hinted at. And number 4 is anxiety regulation. We're going to talk about the last one in the next section. So delivery of oxygen from the blood to the muscles and organs, and what's called the Bohr effect. CO2 is produced by your cells, and then it's returned from the cells to the lungs via your veins, via your blood vessels, and any excess that's present is exhaled. However, not all of it is exhaled. Part of the CO2 that your body produces with each breath is actually retained when you exhale. And this is not a mistake. This is not our body messing up by not getting rid of all the CO2. We are actually designed to retain a lot of the CO2 that's produced, because optimal health and optimal breathing relies upon retaining the proper amounts of CO2. And this relates to the Bohr effect. So why do we need to have CO2 retained? So this is Christian Bohr, the physiologist who, I think well over 100 years ago, discovered this phenomenon of how carbon dioxide relates to oxygen delivery in the cells. He said that the carbon dioxide pressure of the blood is to be regarded as an important factor in the inner respiratory metabolism. If one uses carbon dioxide in appropriate amounts, the oxygen that was taken up can be used more effectively through the body. So thought I'd include a little quote from him as a nice little tribute to the scientists who figured this out. So red blood cells have hemoglobin on them, this compound called hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin bonds to and carries oxygen. So from the lungs, when we take a breath in, we bring in oxygen, and then we have arteries, we have capillaries that are wrapping around little air sacs in our lungs, and that's where gas exchange occurs. So oxygen moves from the lungs into the blood and attaches to hemoglobin on these red blood cells. So how does it unattach? How does it disconnect from the red blood cell and actually get dropped off in the cells so it can be used to produce energy? Because if it's just floating around in our blood all the time, it doesn't do us any good. It doesn't help our cells, our organs, our muscles. It doesn't help them actually produce energy if it stays stuck to the red blood cells. So how does it know when to disconnect? What causes that chemical bond to dissociate and separate so oxygen can be dropped off? Well, it is actually carbon dioxide, the presence of carbon dioxide, that allows for that oxygen to separate itself, to undo that chemical bond to the red blood cell, to the hemoglobin, and move from the blood into the cells, into the mitochondria, where it can be used for energy. And this is the famous curve illustrating the Bohr effect. And basically what this is showing is that the hemoglobin oxygen saturation changes dramatically depending on the presence of carbon dioxide, how much carbon dioxide is present. So let's just take as an example 35 milligrams or millimeters of mercury. This is a measure of pressure of oxygen in the blood. Okay, so at that level of pressure at oxygen, depending on whether you have very low levels of carbon dioxide, that's what hypocapnia is, low carbon dioxide present, that will lead you to this part of the curve right here, right about here, which is something like 80 to 90% hemoglobin saturation. What that means is the hemoglobin is very, very tightly bound to the oxygen. It is not releasing the oxygen. When does it release the oxygen? At that same partial pressure of oxygen? Well, if you look at this red curve, this is hypercapnia. This is where you have high levels of carbon dioxide present. And this, at the same exact partial pressure of oxygen, we go from 80 to 90, and as far as the amount of oxygen that's bonded to the red blood cells, to all the way down to 35. Okay, so there's a huge reduction in how strong of an affinity, how strong of a connection there is between that hemoglobin molecule and the oxygen molecule. In other words, in simple terms, what this means is that the way that oxygen gets from the blood into the cells depends upon the presence of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is essentially the doorway that lets oxygen reach our cells, reach our muscles and our organs. If the door is only partially open, then only some of the oxygen at our disposal that's there in the blood will actually get delivered to the cells. If the door is wide open, then oxygen flows through the doorway and we can deliver that oxygen to our cells efficiently. So think energy, right? Okay, in order for your cells to produce energy efficiently, they need to be getting oxygen efficiently. And if they're not, due to chronically low levels of carbon dioxide, by the way, that has been decisively linked to states of chronic fatigue. It's known that most people with chronic fatigue have low levels of carbon dioxide. What happens is the difference between that and this, how much oxygen is actually able to get delivered to those cells. And it's known, there's a whole bunch of research that has shown that people in chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and many other states that are related to chronic fatigue have a metabolic switch where they become less effective at using aerobic metabolism. That's metabolism where the mitochondria are using oxygen to produce energy. In other words, it's healthy, optimal energy production at the cellular level that relies on oxygen. In these states, it's been shown that they have much less efficient aerobic, oxygen-based respiration, energy production, and they switch more to anaerobic respiration, which doesn't require oxygen. Well, is there a link there? Absolutely. So here's the counterintuitive part about deep breaths. Taking big, deep breaths does not actually lead to better oxygen delivery to your cells. It reduces oxygen delivery. So in contrast, when breathing volume remains at optimal levels, CO2 levels are higher, which helps the delivery of oxygen to the cells. If you breathe too much, if you're hyperventilating or overbreathing, which most people are doing because that's where their brain and nervous system has been taught to regulate their breathing pattern. If you're chronically doing that, you have chronically low levels of CO2, and that means you're going to be inefficient at delivering oxygen to your cells. So here's the big key. Overbreathing, breathing too much and breathing too often, reduces the levels of CO2, resulting in decreased ability to get the oxygen that's in your blood delivered to your cells where they can be used to produce energy. Overbreathing is one of the absolute biggest factors that wrecks people's energy and health. So how do we actually get wired into this state? Well, chronic hyperventilation or overbreathing is breathing a volume of air greater than that which your body requires. So again, too much carbon dioxide is exhaled from the lungs. Carbon dioxide levels get lowered with overbreathing. And when this happens over time, we get a lowering of the brain's CO2 threshold. In other words, the brain's little thermostat mechanism that regulates breathing rate and breathing frequency in accordance with CO2 becomes hypersensitive to CO2. So it's chronically detecting there's too much CO2 present, there's too much CO2 present. We got to blow off CO2 so we get rid of this excess CO2. When that happens chronically, it actually wires that into your brain and your autonomic nervous system. That's the nervous system that regulates our breathing pattern as the new normal baseline breathing pattern. So people can go years and decades in this pattern of chronic overbreathing and have no idea that they're breathing in an abnormal or dysfunctional or non-optimal way. And yet, one of the biggest contributors to their chronic fatigue is right there in front of their face. And they do it, 10,000 times a day. So here is another way of illustrating how this happens. There's a few reasons why our autonomic nervous system and our brain can get wired into this state. One is poor fitness. Being sedentary, as I said earlier in the Bolt score section, creates a mismatch between the rate of production of carbon dioxide from the cells and the desire of the brain to expel carbon dioxide. In addition, chronic stress. If you have stress, psychological stress actually stimulates a physiological stress response. It stimulates the fight or flight or sympathetic nervous system, which speeds up your heart rate and speeds up your breathing rate. And that is designed to try to blow off carbon dioxide in the state of stress. We're going to talk about why that happens, really important to understanding anxiety and stress. If you're in a chronic state of stress, your brain will be chronically trying to breathe faster and breathe more so that it can blow off the excess carbon dioxide and calm the body down. And then finally, there's also a link with poor nutrition. So you may not have all three of these, even just one of these could be a factor for you, but all three of these together can be a brutal combination. If you eat a standard American diet, if you eat lots of processed foods, those processed foods have something called, in the scientific literature, a higher potential renal acid load. In other words, they tend to push your blood into a more acidic state. Well, carbon dioxide actually does that as well. So what happens if you have an intake of food that is pushing your system into an overly acidic state in the blood? your body will respond to it to try to buffer that pH by lowering levels of carbon dioxide to keep pH within normal parameters, to keep how acidic or alkaline your blood is in the proper range. So all three of these things together, maybe one of them, like chronic stress, is the biggest factor for you, or maybe all of them are a factor. This wires into our nervous system and into our brain to go into a chronic state of overbreathing, of chronically breathing in too much and breathing too fast. So your breathing volume can be 200 to 300% greater than needed without even noticing anything is wrong. And once that pattern of overbreathing is wired in mentally and physically, you will breathe in excess of what your body actually requires every minute, every hour, and every day. And you'll be chronically offloading too much CO2. So you'll be chronically sitting there with too low of CO2, which is hindering the delivery of oxygen to your cells. And this is why chronic overbreathing, which is rampant, maybe 8 or 9 out of 10 people are in this state of breathing too much volume of air per unit time. And they're chronically taking in, 200, 300% more air than their body actually needs. This is one of the biggest factors in chronic low levels of energy and high levels of anxiety. So here's a quick recap of everything we've covered. Deep breathing is stressed breathing. Light breathing is optimal breathing. Number 2, CO2 is not just a waste gas that your body needs to get rid of. It plays several critical roles in your physiology. Harnessing the power of CO2 is the big key to supercharging oxygen delivery to your cells. And number 4, overbreathing decreases carbon dioxide levels and sensitizes the body and the brain to CO2, which causes fatigue, poor oxygen extraction, decreased energy production, and anxiety in a big way. And number 5, one of the major keys to getting rid of anxiety and increasing energy, being healthy, is eliminating overbreathing and increasing your levels of CO2. So how do we do this? How do we fix overbreathing and optimize our CO2 levels? What is optimal breathing and how do we train our body to do it automatically? Well, there's 3 steps to doing this. And this is, again, the big key to increasing energy and combating anxiety. Number 1 is to eliminate excess CO2 loss by training the 4 keys to optimal breathing. Number 2 is to improve your CO2 tolerance, and there's specific exercises to reset your CO2 threshold. 4 keys. Number 1, light breathing, not deep breathing. Slow breathing, not fast breathing. Nasal breathing, not mouth breathing. And diaphragmatic breathing, not chest breathing. This is what optimal breathing looks like. So let's talk about each one of those. So number 1 is breathe slow. Let me illustrate this point. Okay, so you can see it visually. What is the difference between unhealthy, healthy, and optimal breathing? Unhealthy breathing looks like this. We've got a big volume of air moving in and out with each breath, and it's fast. We're taking a lot of breaths for this unit of time. This is, let's say, 15 or 20 seconds. So we're taking 4 breaths or so in that span of time, and a big volume of air is coming in and out with each breath. Also notice the difference here is meant to show that there's some variability. It's erratic breathing where not each breath is the same. And if you have what's called dyspnea, or a feeling of air hunger, which is extremely common in people with chronic fatigue, you'll have this kind of a breathing pattern. You'll have fast breathing, big volume of air. You'll have variability, differences in the breath on some breaths, and you're going to have a Bolt score of somewhere in the range of 10 to 20 seconds, and you're probably going to be breathing about 15 to 20 breaths per minute. If you have healthy breathing, you're going to be breathing about 10 to 12 breaths per minute, and you'll have a 40-second Bolt score, and this is more what your breathing looks like. Smooth, rhythmic, less volume of air coming in, a longer, more slower exhale. And if you have really optimal breathing, you might have an extremely long breath hold time or Bolt score of 60 seconds and beyond. And your breathing rate might be 2 to 8 breaths per minute. And your breathing will look more like this: an inhale that might last 2 to 4 seconds, a long, long exhale, and then a non-conscious breath hold for 4 or 5 seconds in between each breath that just happens automatically, and then another breath. Okay, so you can contrast healthy and optimal breathing with what unhealthy breathing looks like. People who are chronically fatigued, people who have high anxiety levels, tend to have breathing that looks like this. So when we breathe fast, 20 breaths per minute or so, we utilize approximately 50% of the oxygen in each breath. When we breathe normal, 12 to 18 breaths per minute, you utilize about 70% of the oxygen in each breath. And when we breathe less, even less than that, 5 to 8 breaths per minute, we utilize about 85% of the oxygen in each breath. So this is why, to go back to this for a second, this is why this person can, in the same period of time, can take in a way, way less amount of air than this person over here. It's because they're taking in way less air over a span of a minute, but they're way more efficient at extracting that oxygen and delivering it to the cells and utilizing it to produce energy. Okay, so rapid breathing and deep breathing is not healthy breathing. Also, it's worth noting that people who breathe more than 20 breaths per minute have an extremely low CO2 tolerance. Very important. The second key to optimal breathing habits, nasal breathing. Extremely important to understand that proper breathing is through the nose. As Patrick McKeown says, noses are for breathing, mouths are for eating. So in terms of the differences, there are many differences we could talk about. Nose breathing, going back to what I was just talking about, allows for 20% higher oxygen uptake compared to mouth breathing. Also, it warms up the air, it filters the air of bacteria and germs, and it allows for greater work intensity. Mouth breathing has lots and lots of negative effects, increases the risk of respiratory infections, of cavities, of gum disease, contributes to dehydration, reduces respiratory strength of all the respiratory muscles and diaphragm, increases the risk of developing forward head posture where you're like this, and increases the risk of snoring and sleep apnea, among many other bad things that we could talk about there. Now, why is nasal breathing so important? One of the big reasons why is it's the major source for a gas called nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is actually produced within the nasal cavity when we breathe in and out through the nose. Now, interestingly, this is a fairly recent scientific discovery. Until the 1980s, the gas nitric oxide was actually considered a toxic substance. It was linked with smog and harmful effects in the environment, and it wasn't really known that we even had it in our body. Now, in 1992, it was proclaimed the molecule of the year by the journal Science, and it was an important molecule that unites neuroscience, physiology, and immunology, and plays a critical role in numerous aspects of our physiology, but especially in how cells communicate and defend themselves. And then in 1998, just about a little more than 20 years ago, these scientists were awarded the Nobel Prize for their discovery that nitric oxide plays a critical role in the cardiovascular system and in blood vessel dilation. And that's what we're going to focus on right now. So many, many different benefits of higher levels of nitric oxide production. It functions as an antioxidant, actually also functions as an oxidant in certain contexts, used in a lot of different ways in the body. It works in harmony with CO2, so we need to optimize both our CO2 and our nitric oxide levels. It boosts vascular and lung health. It promotes relaxation. It is anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and antibacterial. Let's talk about this study. Okay, this was a study looking at nasal polyposis in erectile dysfunction. And basically what they found is they took a bunch of men who suffered from erectile dysfunction. And they found that there's been a few studies that have found that erectile dysfunction is linked with mouth breathing and an inability to breathe properly through the nose. And a high proportion of them have nasal polyposis. They have these kind of protrusions or polyps in their nasal cavity that prevent optimal air exchange and breathing through the nose. And what they found was that by taking these men who suffered from erectile dysfunction that had this nasal condition, when they did surgery and they removed these polyps in the nose, all of a sudden, these men's penises started working better. Okay, their erectile dysfunction problem went away. Why? Why did removing something in the nose change what's happening down there? Okay, the reason why is that nitric oxide plays a critical role in blood vessel dilation and allowing for circulation and blood to be delivered effectively to the tissues, including, of course, in the context of penile erection, in the context of sex. And this also applies to women, by the way, because they also have erectile tissue on the vagina that also plays a critical role in their sex life and their pleasure and response to sex. We need adequate circulation and ability to engorge those tissues with blood, and that depends on adequate levels of nitric oxide. Adequate levels of nitric oxide depends upon nose breathing. In addition, I also want to mention a cool little trick, which is that humming while you exhale has been shown to increase nitric oxide release by 15-fold. Huge increase in nitric oxide just by going like this. Now I'm going to get a nice little boost of circulation and brain boost as a result of that. So just that little thing, take a few seconds to do that, has a profound effect on nitric oxide levels. Now, let's talk about another role of nitric oxide beyond blood vessel dilation, which is incredibly important, obviously, for delivering oxygen and blood effectively to the tissues. And that is viruses and immune health, which is important for obvious reasons right now. There is a very strong correlation between mouth breathing and the incidence of upper respiratory tract infections. You are way more prone to get infections, colds, flus, other types of viruses that are very popular right now if you are a mouth breather as opposed to a nose breather. When you breathe through the mouth, the particles basically have free access to go directly down into the lungs without being properly filtered. When you breathe through your nose, the virus particles are much more likely to get filtered out. And when you breathe through your nose, you have a higher quantity of nitric oxide to interact with that virus. Now, what is that nitric oxide doing? Some researchers in Israel have developed a spray called Sanotize, and it's a nasal spray. You spray in your nose, and it massively increases the amount of nitric oxide present in the nose. What does that big surge of nitric oxide do? It kills viruses, okay? Including, and it's been shown that this kills SARS-CoV-2 in the context of this research that they've done, okay? So breathing through your nose, humming as a nice little way to maybe, I don't know the exact quantification of how much humming boosts it versus how much this spray boosts it. Maybe it's the same. Maybe the spray boosts it twice as much. I don't know. I don't know if it's possible to quantify that yet. But what I do know is that part of the reason that nitric oxide is present in the nose is for this purpose. It's for immune health. It is to sanitize the air coming in and kill off viruses. So we can use that to our advantage. So breathing through the mouth has basically no influence on nitric oxide production. Breathing through the nose increases nitric oxide production 6-fold, and then humming on the exhales increases nitric oxide 15-fold. So this is simple, doesn't cost any money, can be done in seconds. And let's say you did 2 minutes in the morning, 2 minutes in the evening. Might this have a profound effect? Probably. I would bet yes. Okay, so again, not only killing viruses and immune health, but also increasing circulation and therefore oxygen delivery to your cells. So 3 reasons why breathing through the nose allows for the body to utilize up to 30% more of the oxygen that enters your lungs. 1, it takes longer to breathe through the nose as opposed to the mouth, okay, because these are smaller holes and it's harder to pull air through, okay. That sounds like it might be a bad thing, but what that means, going back to what I was telling you before, is slower breathing actually gives your lungs the proper amount of time to fully extract the oxygen that's in each breath. If you're breathing through your mouth, you're breathing at a faster rate, and your lungs are not efficiently extracting that oxygen. Number 2 is increased air pressure. And number 3 is, of course, increased nitric oxide production. So mouths are for eating, noses are for breathing. Key number 3 to optimal breathing is breathe into your belly, not your chest. This advice that is common is accurate and good advice. Okay, so the diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscle that sits just beneath the lungs, or kind of an umbrella-shaped muscle. And when we inhale, this muscle contracts and actually moves downward and creates more space for the lungs to open up, and then the lungs fill with air. On the exhale, the muscle moves in the other direction and pushes the air out of the lungs. Okay, so poor breathing habits don't take full advantage of this muscle. They're predominantly chest breathing instead of using the diaphragm to open up the belly, open up the pelvic floor, and inhale down into the body. By utilizing the natural benefits of abdominal or diaphragmatic breathing, you're going to improve the quality of your blood flow, you're going to increase the delivery of oxygen to your muscles, and reduce the symptoms of anxiety associated with overbreathing. Also, it will allow you to enjoy better health and maximize your potential of your physical activity and your sports performance. So breathing through, this is another important point, breathing through your diaphragm stimulates the parasympathetic system. It is the type of breathing that is associated with being in a state of calm, whereas chest breathing actually is more of stressed breathing and stimulates the sympathetic nervous system that mimic more of stress, how the body is designed to breathe in a state of stress. Number 4 is breathe light to breathe right. Altering the number of breaths per minute or counting the size of each breath in seconds has become common in a lot of breathing circles, but importantly, this by itself is not the answer. This actually often has little or no effect in correcting dysfunctional breathing habits. For example, telling someone to inhale for 2 seconds and exhale for 3 seconds doesn't actually provide guidance on whether they should take a very gentle breath with a small volume of air or take in a huge volume of air with each of those breaths. So if you take somebody who's an overbreather and you just say, hey, I want you to do 2 seconds in, 3 seconds out, or I want you to do 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, that by itself, if you just give that advice and tell someone to slow down their breathing, what they're going to do is compensate for that by simply breathing in a larger volume of air with each breath. And that is also not optimal. That is actually the mistake that I made many years ago that wired in my physiology into a chronic state of anxiety. Big mistake. It's a subtle, common thing, and it made it took a huge toll in my life. Just from me thinking that optimal breathing was deep breathing and trying forcefully as much, many times during the day to force myself to take really deep breaths and big volume of air and breathe in a big volume of air with each breath. And it's absolutely wrong and it's absolutely bad advice. So these are 2 different kinds of breath that take the same amount of time to do. This is an in-breath that takes 2 seconds. This is an in-breath that takes 2 seconds. This is an out-breath that takes 3 to 4 seconds. And this is an out-breath that takes 3 to 4 seconds. These 2 things, these 2 ways of breathing, take exactly the same amount of time, but they're totally different breaths, okay, because they're taking in different volumes of air. This is more stressed breathing. This is more optimal breathing. So simply counting the length of a breath using seconds is not the answer. We need to actually entrain not only a reduced breathing rate, but also primarily to reduce breathing volume. That's the big key. So here's another way of stating this. This is from well-known Qigong and Tai Chi master Chris Pei, who says there are 3 levels of breathing. And this is a nice way of conceptualizing all these 4 keys to optimal breathing that I've taught you. Number 1 is breathe so softly that the person next to you can't hear you breathing. Number 2 is breathe so softly that you can't hear yourself breathing. And number 3 is breathe so softly that you can't even feel yourself breathing. Okay, this is a nice quote to summarize it as well. This is from Lao Tzu. He said, "The perfect human breathes as though they are not breathing at all." So here's the quick summary. Harnessing the power of CO2 and nitric oxide is the big key to supercharging oxygen delivery to your cells. Overbreathing decreases carbon dioxide and sensitizes the body to CO2, which causes fatigue, poor oxygen extraction, decreased energy production, and anxiety. Number 3, one of the biggest factors in getting rid of anxiety and increasing energy is eliminating overbreathing and increasing CO2. Number 4, we have to train our brain into a new automatic, non-conscious breathing pattern via using these tools that I just taught you. We want diaphragmatic, nasal, slow, and light breathing, and we want to use that exercise to increase our CO2 tolerance. And number 5, we must stop blowing off too much CO2 and increase our CO2 tolerance and reset our CO2 threshold. Those are the big keys to changing how your body extracts and utilizes oxygen and produces energy efficiently instead of inefficiently. Energy key number 3. So this is all about how to rewire your brain and nervous system out of chronic stress and anxiety mode. So first of all, the nervous system. What is the nervous system? I've mentioned this a whole bunch of times. What is it? Basically, we have our brain, we have our spinal cord, and we have nerves throughout the body. The nervous system links the brain and body. It integrates sensations, perceptions, feelings, thoughts, and actions. It also controls a lot of housekeeping functions, things that just happen automatically without our conscious or voluntary control, like our heart beating, like our digestion and the contractions of smooth muscle in our gastrointestinal tract, many other things, and our respiration, right? Our breathing rate and our breathing frequency is controlled automatically, unconsciously by our brain, by our autonomic nervous system. In addition, your nervous system is also key in regulating your level of arousal, okay? Not sexual arousal, but alertness versus calmness. So there is a continuum, the arousal continuum. And basically what this is on the right here in the green is to be awake and alert, but also in a state of calm. On the other end of the spectrum is a state of intense stress, anxiety, and panic. Okay, and we can be, this is not a black or white thing, you can be anywhere along this spectrum. And this correlates with states of autonomic nervous system arousal. The autonomic nervous system is basically, you can think of it as the automatic nervous system that regulates a whole bunch of different functions in our physiology automatically without our conscious awareness. And you probably have heard the terms at some point, the fight or flight nervous system and the rest and digest. And those correspond to the sympathetic nervous system, that's the fight or flight, or the parasympathetic, the rest and digest. The fight or flight system does a few things. It increases your heart rate and it increases the rate of respiration. So stress breathing is fast breathing, faster heart rate, faster breathing rate. Rest and digest, the parasympathetic system, does the opposite. It slows down the heart rate and the breathing rate. Where you are on this arousal spectrum plays a huge role in your quality of life and your ability to function well. Being stressed is not an optimal state of being for most activities and for your sense of well-being, your enjoyment of life. It's great in an acute context. If you're at an airport and you're late to catch a plane, then you are basically in a state of fight or flight, and it might serve a valid role to help mobilize energy and get your juices flowing, so to speak, so that you can run and breathe well and make that plane. Okay, but this is not the physiological state where you want to spend the majority of your day. Yet, most people are spending most of their day in a state of excessive sympathetic nervous system arousal. And there are many, many negative effects. This is just to name a few, but it increases our breathing rate and wires in over-breathing as our normal state, which again does all these different things that we've talked about as far as decreasing CO2, decreasing oxygen delivery to the cells, inhibiting circulation, and more. Chronic stress also causes profound hormonal dysregulation, many different hormones. We could talk about cortisol, we could talk about testosterone, thyroid hormone, many, many others. Number 3, it causes anxiety and it makes you dumber. We know that under states of extreme stress, we actually drop about 30 IQ points. So this is not where you want to be operating from as you go about your daily life. In addition, when we have chronic stress, it causes fatigue. And this is a bit nuanced because actually in an acute context of stress, we actually get a surge of energy. When we produce adrenaline, when we secrete adrenaline and we secrete cortisol, and we have these stress hormones pumping through our system, we actually get more energy in that acute context. However, when this is chronic, it actually it leads to mechanisms compensating for that and actually reducing our energy levels. So chronic stress is a profound cause of chronic fatigue. Also, importantly, right now, chronic stress depresses immune function. And this might be a little known fact. I've hardly seen it reported anywhere, but it's on the CDC's website in their recent report on comorbidities in the context of COVID. And they mention that not only are, some of the biggest risk factors for severe COVID are obesity, diabetes, heart disease, poor metabolic health in general, especially diseases of nutrition and lifestyle. But one of the other big keys that is on there, one of the other big risk factors for severe COVID is actually anxiety disorders. Now, importantly, there are mechanisms built into the body to both induce stress and to turn it off. If we understand the physiology of how those mechanisms work, we can use them to our advantage. So when we're under stress, we often experience increased breathing, increased heart rate, and a racing mind. Now, most people decide when they're under stress to work on their mind. That's how they try to address it. But actually, it works way, way better to work on your breath. So we have so many different tools out there, so many different self-help methods and different apps on our phone to try to address and combat stress and help us reduce stress that are mind-based. Very, very few of them understand that it actually is way more effective to, in the context of reducing stress within minutes or seconds, it's way more effective to use your breath to do it. Engage your physiology by directly tapping into your nervous system. So when you do that, when you modulate your breathing, you can rapidly decrease sympathetic activation, sympathetic fight or flight nervous system activation, and you can rapidly reduce or eliminate stress and anxiety in the brain. Why? Why is this more effective? Well, to really take control over your nervous system, we need to hack into our nervous system directly by employing our physiology and by using our body. Getting out of stress states is really about training our ability to take our nervous system out of stress, out of agitation, out of anxiety mode, and put it into calm mode. Okay, so again, that autonomic nervous system is regulating whether you're in a stress state or a calm state, and that is trainable. You can do practices to train your nervous system where it's regulating along that arousal continuum. So there's several steps that are extremely effective in doing this. One is basically what we've already talked about. By retraining your automatic non-conscious breathing habits and your CO2 threshold, you can have a profound effect on reducing anxiety and taking your nervous system out of chronic stress and anxiety mode by actually changing the way your autonomic nervous system is regulating your baseline breathing levels, taking yourself out of overbreathing and hypersensitivity to CO2 and wiring in a new pattern of breathing that's slower, lighter, gentler breathing that that also raises that level of CO2. Okay, and especially raises the level of your CO2 threshold, so decreases the sensitivity of your brain to CO2. And step 2 is specific breathwork practices that you can do during the states of acute stress to take control of your nervous system and brain within seconds. So let's talk briefly about step 1, since we mostly already covered that, but I just want to show you some of the science. And then step 2 is what we're going to focus on. Now, many people are not aware of this, but CO2 levels, in addition to what I described earlier about how via the Bohr effect they allow for efficient oxygen delivery to your cells, CO2 levels are also one of the biggest factors in anxiety. The speed, in addition to CO2, another factor of your breathing rate that regulates your anxiety level and where you are in that arousal continuum is the speed in which your diaphragm moves actually signals to your brain how alert and how stressed you should be or how relaxed you should be. It's sending a lot of signals to the brain to chronically increase sympathetic fight or flight nervous system activation. So when you are chronically overbreathing, you are basically putting your physiology and your brain into a state of chronic stress, tension, and anxiety. Now, chronic overbreathing and a low CO2 threshold is actually the #1 biggest contributor to chronic anxiety. Okay, this is a little known fact, again, because almost everybody is focused on the mind and psychological, mental techniques to address anxiety because they think it's all up here. But the thing is about the brain is there isn't actually a mind-body disconnect. The nervous system, including the brain, is very much part of the body. And when we use the body, we have a profound impact on what's going on in the brain, more so than trying to use the mental states to control the mental states. So chronic overbreathing leads to chronic anxiety, chronic tension and pain, higher levels of inflammation. It contributes to many diseases, loss of resilience to stress, and it's a big contributor to fatigue. So basically, you can think of it like this. If you've got a low CO2 threshold, it puts your physiology into a chronic state of stress and anxiety. If you've got a high CO2 threshold, it puts your physiology into a state of relaxed calm. We have many lines of evidence showing this link between breathing and anxiety. There's many different kinds of studies that have looked at different things that show this profound link. And again, almost no one is aware of this, and yet the research exists. So one of the things that we can look at is chronic breathing disorders. So how prevalent is anxiety and they also looked at depression in this study in people with chronic breathing disorders. And what they found is that over 60% of them have either anxiety or depression or both. Now, they also mention here this 31% figure is this is talking about the proportion of those of that 60% or 61% that is not being treated. But this is one line of evidence that shows this profound link between your breathing habits and your mood states, your psychological states, and anxiety in particular. Also, there's some really fascinating studies that where they've looked at the inhalation of carbon dioxide. So you basically just inhale a carbon dioxide solution of 5% or 7.5% carbon dioxide, and within seconds, you can rapidly induce a very intense state of anxiety in those people just by having higher levels of CO2 in the body in the context of someone who's very sensitive to CO2. And on the other side of this, we also know that taking conscious control of your physiology and training in a new pattern of breathing profoundly influences anxiety as well. So we know there is this very strong relationship between how we're breathing and our anxiety levels. And when you take people with chronic anxiety and you have them do a breath training program, you can profoundly reduce their level of anxiety. And this is a cool one, just to show you how easy this is, so it doesn't need to feel intimidating for you. This is a study where they took high school students and they had them do breath training just 3 times a week for only 5 minutes each time. So we're talking a total of 15 minutes of training per week for every 7 days. 5 minutes, 3 times a week. This is nothing. This is just a few minutes every other day. Okay. And what they showed is a huge improvement in CO2 threshold, okay, that relates to CO2 sensitivity, within 6 weeks of a 30% improvement of at least a 30% improvement or more. They're showing up to 44% here in terms of their CO2 threshold. They also showed a profound reduction in anxiety that correlated with the extent that they improved their CO2 tolerance. Okay, so it's that easy. This doesn't need to be hard. You can literally do this. If you do it 3 minutes a day, you can have a huge effect on the quality of your life by massively reducing your anxiety, and by improving that CO2 threshold, you're going to start to entrain your brain and nervous system to regulate your breathing in a different way, to get out of overbreathing, raise that CO2 level up, and therefore deliver oxygen to your cells more efficiently. And more oxygen to the cells means more energy. More energy, less fatigue, less anxiety. This is what we're after. So again, low CO2 threshold, chronic anxiety and stress. High CO2 threshold is relaxed energy. Step 2 is, again, specific breathwork practices that you use during stress, in the moment of intense stress and anxiety, to rapidly take control of your nervous system and reduce or eliminate that anxiety from your brain and your nervous system. So how can we do that? How can we control our level of stress in the brain in the moment of stress? Well, as I said, it does not work very well to just tell yourself, and certainly it doesn't work very well to tell other people, just calm down, calm down. If you've ever said that to your husband or wife, if you're a man and you've ever said it to your wife, you probably know that it does not work very well. But trying to control the mind with the mind is generally very, very ineffective. It's like trying to grab smoke or fog with your hands and grasp it and hold on to it. It just does not work very well. The mind is a very sort of nebulous thing that is fleeting, and the states are very difficult to hold on to. And when your mind is going out of control, it's really difficult to use your mind consciously to regain control of the mind that's out of control. As you probably have known from many years of trying to do that, it does not work very well. So again, what to do instead is to engage your body, engage your physiology to directly tap in to your nervous system by using your breath. And why is the breath the best way to do this? The reason why is that the breath directly interfaces with our nervous system. When you inhale, this is a really kind of amazing fact that most people don't know, but every time you inhale, that diaphragm expands down and the heart actually expands slightly. And when that happens, the flow of blood through the heart slows down. And so the heart sends a signal up to the brain, and this is all happening in milliseconds. The heart sends a signal up to the brain that's saying, well, the blood flow is slowing down, and the brain then sends a signal back to the heart that says, speed up. And the way that it does that is by actually increasing sympathetic nervous system activation, fight or flight nervous system activation. On the other hand, when you exhale, every single time you exhale, believe it or not, your brain does the opposite. So the heart is being compressed now as the diaphragm comes up, blood flow speeds up, the heart sends a signal to the brain saying blood flow is speeding up, the brain then sends a signal back to the heart to slow down. And the way that it does that is through parasympathetic nervous system activation. So every single breath you take, this is happening, okay? This is an amazing feat of our physiology, that this is constantly going on every single breath, where on the inhale, we get sympathetic activation. On the exhale, we get parasympathetic activation. So this is just a pretty amazing feat of how our physiology operates. And this shows you how your breathing directly ties in to your nervous system. This gives you a window, a key to unlocking the operation of your nervous system, which is otherwise regulated unconsciously or non-consciously. And this is a major, is a really special aspect of our physiology, because most things in the body are either conscious or not conscious, right? We move our muscles consciously, do bicep curls or bench press or, go for a run, and we can obviously stop them at rest. And we have other systems like our heart rate and like the contractions of our blood vessels and of our gastrointestinal system that are all unconsciously that we can't regulate. But our breathing is actually both. It's regulated non-consciously, and we can control it consciously as well. So it's this really amazing system, and the brain is designed to do that, to be either to regulate non-consciously all the time, but to also give us the gift, the opportunity to control it consciously. So let's use that gift, right? How can we use the breath consciously to control our brain and rapidly induce calmness when under stress or in a state of anxiety? We use the mechanism that Mother Nature created for us to do exactly that. And the fastest way to lower anxiety in your brain is the physiological sigh. This is something that was discovered all the way back in the 1930s. There's a specific group of neurons in the brainstem of all mammals, that control a breathing pattern called the physiological sigh. Physiological sighs are a pattern of breathing that we're wired to engage in spontaneously, automatically, non-consciously, when CO2 levels get too high and our system is triggered to breathe. So a big aspect of the stress response is having too much CO2 build up in our bloodstream and in our lungs. That triggers a stress and anxiety response, as I mentioned before. The physiological sigh is something that people do spontaneously during sleep. Actually, all mammals do it during sleep spontaneously, during crying, and also under extreme stress. Our nervous system does this automatically because Mother Nature built this into us hundreds of thousands of years ago. So it was designed for the purpose of calming us. Everyone has these neurons, and we all do it unconsciously in these circumstances. But again, the great thing is we can also do it consciously to take control of our brain and our nervous system to rapidly calm stress and reduce anxiety in the brain. Here's how you do it. It's a double inhale through the nose and then a long exhale through the mouth. So it looks like this. Okay, so the key thing is with that double inhale, it's not two inhales that are of equal length. It's actually an inhale that's almost full. So like what would be a normal, pretty full breath in through the nose. Okay, feeling pretty full. And then at the end of that, you're going to force another little bit of air in there. So after that pretty full inhale, then you're going to go and really powerfully suck in an extra bit of air. And then really do a long, slow, very pronounced exhale through the mouth. Again, so double inhale through the nose, mostly full on the initial one, and powerful little after that, and then a long exhale through the mouth. So the inhale should take maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3 seconds, and then you want to try to get that exhale really long, maybe 7 seconds, 9 seconds, 10 seconds. Really try to lengthen it and expand it out, because again, during the exhales, that's when you're getting that parasympathetic activation. Okay, so again, let me show you this one more time. Okay, this is incredibly fast, incredibly powerful. It takes only 2 to 3 of these physiological sighs to rapidly induce calmness and reduce anxiety in the brain. Now, how does this work? Well, the reason it works is because your lungs aren't just 2 big bags of air. They are actually composed of millions of little sacs called alveoli. And what we're doing here is that's special and that's different from normal breathing is that second inhale is doing something special to the alveoli. So normally these alveoli are sort of in a not fully open state. They're sort of like, let's say, in a half open state. They're kind of open, they're expanding and contracting a little bit, but not totally fully. So what we're doing by doing a mostly full breath and then forcing a little bit of excess in there rapidly is we're going and expanding, opening those alveoli up fully. And when that happens, and then we do that long out breath, what that's doing is rapidly offloading a lot of CO2 very, very quickly. And that, just the same as increasing CO2 rapidly can cause those states of anxiety, rapidly offloading CO2 does the exact opposite. It's the single fastest way to calm the brain and nervous system and reduce stress and anxiety. Now, how and when should you use this technique? Well, you don't want it to be your baseline breathing habits, okay? You want to use it only for a few breaths in a state when you need it. During stress, of course, is the number one place that you should use this. Anytime that you're feeling stressed and anxious, this allows you to rapidly, within the span of 30 seconds or a minute, rapidly reduce that level of stress and anxiety in the brain and in the nervous system. So 1 to 4 physiological sighs in the context of any sort of acute state of stress or agitation or anxiety. Another wonderful place to use it, to actually train your nervous system in a really effective way, is during exercise. So in the context of any type of exercise where there's bursts of high intensity effort and then periods of rest, it's good to incorporate the physiological size into the rest period immediately after you finish your set of weight training or your interval if you're doing high interval training. Okay, so you can do 1 to 3 physiological sighs right after the set or interval. Just like sleep makes a huge difference in between workouts for your recovery and your performance in the next session. This is also happening on a micro level in between each interval or each set. And it's in training the skill set, which I think is one of the absolute most important skill sets that you can have as far as improving your health, which is the ability to toggle back and forth between states of stress and states of relaxation. You're learning how to control your own physiology so that when you're in a state of stress, you can now voluntarily bring your brain and nervous system into a state of relaxation. It's hard to overstate how powerful that skill set is in terms of the quality of your life. It's the difference between going through life with chronic fatigue and chronic anxiety, feeling agitated and irritated and anxious all the time versus feeling relaxed. I got this. Even if your life is actually stressful, which all of our lives are, in those states of stress, the quality of your life is much, much better, and your performance is much better if you know how to regulate your own brain and nervous system to stay calm. The other wonderful place to use physiological sighs is right before bed, especially if you're someone who struggles with sleep, if you have insomnia, especially if you're someone that struggles to turn off your racing mind and fall asleep, or if you wake up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., and you have a racing mind and you can't get back to sleep. Physiological sighs are an amazing tool to use in that context to rapidly reduce that anxiety and stress in that brain and all those racing thoughts, bring yourself into a deep state of calm very, very quickly. And in this context, you might want to do more like 10 to 15 physiological sighs in a row to rapidly help induce relaxation and sleep. Now, one of the reasons that breath work is so powerful for tackling stress and anxiety is that it's always available to us. At any moment in time, you can decide to take 3 physiological sighs to rapidly calm your brain and your nervous system. You don't have to buy any fancy tools. You don't have to, it doesn't take effort. This takes a few seconds. It's available to you whenever you want it. It's there with you wherever you go. It doesn't cost any money, doesn't require any fancy technology. It's there all the time. So again, this is a tool. These physiological sighs are a tool we can use in real time to hack our physiology and calm the brain within seconds. So again, this is the quick summary of everything we just covered. The most powerful way to hack your nervous system to reduce stress and anxiety is not to use your mind to control the mind. It's to use your breath. Number two, we want to both retrain the automatic non-conscious breathing pattern to increase CO2 tolerance and reduce chronic tendencies to be in stress and anxiety. And we also want to use conscious breathing techniques in the moment of stress and anxiety to rapidly reduce or eliminate stress and anxiety in the brain. Number three, physiological sighs are the technology that Mother Nature endowed us with for exactly this purpose. And fortunately, she also blessed us with the ability to control it voluntarily, so that through this knowledge that I just gave you, you now have the power to control this mechanism that is also involuntary. You can control it voluntarily and consciously. And when to use them, again, during stress or anxiety, during workouts, and before bed. Okay, now we're on to my absolute favorite part, which is intermittent hypoxic training to hyperoxygenate your cells, reset your CO2 tolerance, and supercharge mitochondrial energy production. The number one type of hormesis for boosting your energy levels, especially in people with chronic fatigue, is intermittent hypoxic training. It is incredible. It is, in my 25 years of studying health science, the single fastest way I've ever found to increase energy levels. So intermittent hypoxic training is using breathing techniques to induce low oxygen levels and also high CO2 levels in the blood, and low oxygen levels in the cells and the mitochondria, to progressively train the mitochondria to utilize oxygen more efficiently. There are numerous confirmed benefits to this type of training. Some of the benefits include, of course, beneficial changes in mitochondrial function, inducing mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria, decreasing inflammation, boosting immune function. Key one right now. And I have a couple really cool studies that are brand new just in the last few months that I want to show you. Increased exercise performance, increased nervous system balance. We're learning how to train and regulate and reset that autonomic nervous system. Improved sleep, mental calmness and toughness, increased resistance to stress, and increased energy levels, of course. Also, intermittent hypoxic training mimics altitude and creates a whole bunch of other adaptations. It leads to a higher tolerance to carbon dioxide. It resets. It's the most powerful way to reset your CO2 threshold. It reduces stress and fatigue of the working muscles. It improves psychological preparedness. It improves recovery time. It reduces lactic acid. And this is really cool and really amazing. And I would have never thought that this was actually possible until I saw the research. Within minutes, these practices cause the secretion of EPO, erythropoietin, which is a hormone that we produce when we're at altitude that stimulates the body to produce more red blood cells. And within minutes of doing these practices, we actually get the production of increased amounts of red blood cells and increased hemoglobin in the blood. So within a few minutes of doing this practice, you just boosted the amount of red blood cells in your blood and your hemoglobin levels so that your blood can now carry more oxygen. And you just did that within a few minutes. Pretty amazing. So let's talk about some of the hormetic mechanisms behind how this works. So one, it trains your blood to extract oxygen more efficiently from the lungs. It actually alters the interface around these little alveoli, these little sacs of air in your lungs, and the tiny capillaries that run around them. It actually structurally alters that interface to create more surface area to allow for more efficient gas exchange. Okay, so you can get the oxygen from the lungs into the blood more efficiently. Why would it do that? Well, in the state of low oxygen during the breath holding, the body is basically saying, we need more oxygen. So what's one of the things that it's doing to get more oxygen into the system? Well, actually modifying this interface between the lungs and the blood. In the same vein, it's also modifying the interface between the blood and the cells where that oxygen needs to get delivered to. And so your cells learn, they're being trained how to extract oxygen from the blood more efficiently. Hypoxia, low oxygen levels, also entrains your mitochondria inside your cells to be protected from low oxygen states. Now, I also want to mention very briefly, just to tie this in, everything I just mentioned here, these three mechanisms, the lung-blood interface, the lung-cell interface, and at the mitochondrial level, we're training these three different layers of our physiology to extract oxygen more efficiently. It is very likely that this is relevant to the current epidemic and how this virus interacts with our body, causing low oxygen states. Imagine if you could build your cellular resistance to that. Might be meaningful, and I'm going to show you a couple studies in a minute. Okay. In addition, hypoxia helps build your mitochondria. It's actually, as I said before, inducing mitochondrial biogenesis. It's causing mitochondria to grow bigger, and for the creation, it's stimulating the creation of new mitochondria from scratch. This is a study where they looked at biopsies of mitochondrial tissues in rats that were subjected to intermittent hypoxic training, and they showed profound changes in the actual structure of mitochondria. They called it the phenomenon of micromitochondria within mitochondria. So they found something like, sort of mitochondria, smaller mitochondria are almost like layered into the bigger mitochondria as an adaptation for those mitochondria to extract and utilize oxygen to produce energy more efficiently. Again, the most important effects that we're after here with this kind of training are the mitochondrial enhancements of our muscles, as well as our organs like the brain, heart, and lungs. That is the big key to making a huge impact on your energy levels. In addition, there's also a ton of research out of the Soviet Union. Now, this is really cool. I mentioned this before, but I just want to mention a couple of the studies where they talk about it, which I've screenshotted here. Studies have shown measurable increases in the number of red blood cells and in hemoglobin levels, that's that molecule on red blood cells that holds oxygen, within minutes of doing intermittent hypoxic training. Within minutes of just doing a few breath holds, your body immediately makes adaptations to increase oxygen carrying capacity in the bloodstream. This is profound, absolutely profound, to have the ability to carry more oxygen in your bloodstream in tandem with all those other layers of adaptations I mentioned before that allow the lung interface, the lung-blood interface, the blood-cell interface, and the mitochondria are all learning how to extract and utilize oxygen more efficiently. And as I said before, these are a couple of brand new studies in 2021 where they are looking at intermittent hypoxic or hypoxic preconditioning training. So these are basically breath hold training practices for COVID-19. Okay, they're talking about preventing severe disease. They're talking about rehabilitation, and what they're showing, for example, here. Intermittent hypoxic preconditioning or intermittent hypoxic training can improve the cardiopulmonary, this is the heart and the blood vessels and the lungs, the function of these systems in patients, and increase the cardiorespiratory fitness and tolerance of the tissues and organs to ischemia. That's to low blood perfusion, low oxygen levels. This is a critical aspect to what's going on in terms of the physiology of how this virus affects us. And there's a huge tie-in to this intermittent hypoxic training that I'm telling you about right now, because this, again, leads to all these specific adaptations that I just mentioned that train your body to be more efficient at extracting and utilizing oxygen, and also train your cells to be more tolerant and to function better in low oxygen states. Now, to be clear, I'm not claiming this is some kind of cure or something like that for COVID. Hopefully it's clear the nuance of how I'm speaking about this, that I do think that this is likely that integrating this training methodology can absolutely help. And I'm speculating, I'm not making a certain claim here, but there is research to show that it's very likely that this can help reduce the incidence of severe outcomes of COVID. So I highly recommend you check out these studies if that's something you're interested in. But the bottom line is, do this type of training, integrate it into your life. It has so many benefits: increasing energy, decreasing anxiety, resetting the CO2 threshold, improving your mitochondria, slowing aging, building that internal antioxidant defense system, and these adaptations that are specific to helping reduce severe outcomes of this current virus that we're dealing with. So how do you actually implement this method? Well, there's a few different ways. Wim Hof breathing has become popularized in the last few years. That's one way of doing this. There's also ancient techniques out of India, different kinds of pranayama techniques, where they do fire breathing in tandem with breath hold practices. So for example, 30 to 50 rapid fire breathing breaths. And this is where you pump your belly and breathe in and out of your nose. So you're doing 30 to 50 of those, exhale out all your air and hold the breath. Okay, that's one variation of how to do it. There's also DMT breathing or alkaline breathing. Wim Hof breathing is based on Tumo breathing, which is a technique that's come out of Tibet. It's been done there for probably thousands of years. And those breathing practices, depending on which variation you're doing, might be through the mouth or through the nose. And they emphasize the inhales and do shorter, less emphasized exhales that are not full exhales. So for example, through the nose looks like this. Or the same thing can be done in and out through the mouth entirely. So there's different ways of doing this, but fundamentally what we're doing is that we're doing the hyperventilation to blow off lots of CO2, and then we're exhaling fully and holding our breath as long as possible and allowing our CO2 to build back up over a long period of time. And this profoundly resets the system. This is the single fastest way to reset your CO2 threshold, and really the single fastest way to rewire your physiology out of anxiety. Another way of doing this that's kind of cool because you can track it somewhat objectively, which is to count how many paces you can get. So you can do the breathing practices, exhale and hold the breath, and then as you're on a walk, and you can count the number of paces. Wonderful way of doing it. I often do this while I'm on walks, because you can do it very easily. If you're on a, while I'm walking my dog anyway, might as well get some training in. Only takes a few minutes, very, very easy to do, and very powerful in terms of the results. There's one last little amazing layer that I want to share with you, which is if you combine these practices with mental training, it adds a whole extra layer to this where you can really amplify the results. Now, what we're doing with these practices, when the diaphragm is pumping fast, when we're doing these really fast, powerful inhales, it's actually inducing physiological stress. It's sending stress signals to the brain. We're activating the sympathetic nervous system. We're self-inducing a state of stress, which is stimulating our heart to beat faster and our breath to move faster. It's stimulating the release of small amounts of stress hormones even. We're self-inducing stress, physiological stress. And what you want to do in tandem with this is while you're in that breath hold and you're holding your breath, your physiology is going to be induced into that state of stress. You're going to feel a bit of anxiety. You're going to feel the desire to breathe. You're going to feel some sense of discomfort, right, as you're holding your breath. So we can use that as an opportunity to train resilience, train mental toughness, and to train our nervous system how to be calm and relaxed even during physiological stress. And this adds a whole other dimension to this practice, because now it's not only what's going on physiologically, where you're inducing these states physiologically that are causing these different adaptations to your mitochondria and the lung-blood interface and, EPO and red blood cells and hemoglobin and all those other things I told you about. But now you're also working on your mind, where you're training mental toughness and calmness. You're training how to take your nervous system out of anxiety while you're self-inducing a state of physiological stress. And this aspect of the practice is unbelievably powerful. Here is the bottom line of all of this. If you're someone who has been struggling with poor energy levels or high levels of stress and anxiety, and you'd like to really learn how to do all of this with step-by-step world-class guidance, I have some really great news for you, which is I have partnered with world-renowned breathing expert Patrick McKeown to bring you the most powerful and cutting-edge breathing course ever created for enhancing energy levels and reducing anxiety. And it is our new Breathing for Energy program. This is absolutely cutting edge stuff. It is packed with fully guided practices. All you got to do is press play and follow along. And this is the single most powerful course ever created for those dealing with fatigue or anxiety issues, chronic stress issues, who are looking to rewire their brain and their body out of fatigue and anxiety and into relaxed, calm energy. So here are the different modules of the program: the advanced breathing science with me, where I will take you in much greater depth through all of the stuff we just covered here. And you're going to learn in depth with guided practices. And there's a whole bunch from Patrick as well that take you through how to build CO2 tolerance and reset your CO2 threshold, the 4 keys to optimal breathing, how to take control of your internal levels of CO2, nitric oxide, and oxygen to optimize your moment-to-moment energy, focus, and relaxation. And just like we covered here, the physiological side to rapidly reduce sympathetic activation and rapidly reduce anxiety and stress in the brain. There's also tools that we can use to enhance energy and to enhance focus and to take ourselves in and out, to toggle back and forth between calmness, between stress, between relaxation, between high energy and focus, and so on. We're learning how to take control of our nervous system consciously to enter into the states that we want to be in. Okay? And we're learning how to permanently rewire your brain for energy and focus. The 4 steps to rewire your nervous system out of stress mode with fully guided practices and in-depth guidance on intermittent hypoxic training. Then there is another track from Patrick that is all for people with ME/CFS, with myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, also for fibromyalgia or any other type of person with severe fatigue or very poor health. This is very gentle practices, 7 weeks of fully guided step-by-step breathwork training where Patrick will take you through the exact practices that he's developed for people with these chronic fatigue issues. He'll take you through how to rewire your brain and nervous system and how to breathe properly, to reset your CO2 threshold and super oxygenate your cells to have more energy than you've had in years. It's a 7-week progressive and gentle. That's the really key part with people in this physiological state. It has to be gentle, specifically designed for people with severe fatigue. And this is, I think, the single biggest game changer for people dealing with severe chronic fatigue ever. I've never found anything faster. I've never found anything more powerful than this. You're going to get tools to retrain your automatic breathing habits. You're going to get 1 new module every week to gently progress from the previous week. So you're building progressively one onto the next. That is one of the huge keys to this process. It has to be done progressively and it has to be done gently. And again, you're going to get step-by-step, fully guided training videos from Patrick on exactly how to do all of that. There's also another track for people dealing with sleep problems, with insomnia, with snoring, and obstructive sleep apnea. You're going to get, again, Patrick giving you fully guided practices to open your airways and combat these obstructions to your breathing and to sleep deeper than you have in many, many years. You're going to learn a whole bunch of amazing techniques. This is an area of specialty for him and for people who struggle with their sleep or who have sleep apnea. These tools are an absolute life changer. Then there is another specific track for people who suffer from anxiety, panic disorder, or who are dealing with chronic stress, how to rewire your nervous system and your brain out of that mode and use specific breathing techniques to get your nervous system out of stress mode. Okay. So again, fully guided practices from Patrick. He's developed this specific track specifically for people with anxiety and stress issues. And you're going to learn a whole bunch of amazing techniques to do that and to reset your CO2 threshold, to squash anxiety. Absolutely incredibly powerful tools for those who have been debilitated by chronic anxiety. You're also going to get a track for people without any of those problems, for people who are healthy and fit already and in good shape and who are exercisers. And this module is going to help take your health, your energy levels, and your performance to the next level. So this is advanced guided breathwork practices for already fit and healthy people to take you to the next level of energy, physical performance, endurance, strength, stamina. You're going to get step-by-step guidance, and you're going to get a program builder so that you can design the perfect program for you, or it's going to show you exactly what the perfect program is for your particular level. And this is probably my favorite part of the course. This is from a good friend of mine who has developed these amazing tools, who's developed these amazing videos that are fully guided practices that take you into intermittent hypoxic training. They've got music in them. They've got visuals in them. They're fully guided to control the tempo and show you exactly how you should be breathing. All you got to do is press play and follow along. They're fun. They're amazing. They've got little reminders and cues built into them to show you exactly what you should be doing. Also with your mental state to remind you how to control your physiology consciously as you're doing these practices. And most importantly, these are fun practices. All you got to do is set the one up that is your practice for the day. You press play and you do it in 10 minutes. You're done. And they're really engaging. You're going to fall in love with them. We've developed 6 full levels of intermittent hypoxic training to take you all the way from 10 to 15 second breath holds, which someone might have in a severe state of chronic fatigue, all the way up to advanced training with multi-minute breath holds that are probably well beyond your current capacity. We're talking about very high level stuff that is going to challenge even the best of you. So we've got that full progression from very basic to very advanced and multiple sessions at each level to guide you through. In addition, there's several bonuses that we're going to put in here. We've got 2 yoga nidra practices that help entrain your physiology into ultra deep states of relaxation, ultra deep states of calm. These are one of the most powerful practices that I've ever discovered personally for rebalancing neurotransmitters in the brain, especially dopamine and serotonin, as well as learning to take control of your nervous system and guide it voluntarily into very deep states of relaxation. So there's 2 practices that I've developed. One is a 20-minute guided practice with me, and the other one is a short 10-minute practice. So whichever one you want to do, depending on your needs. This is not something you have to do by any means, but it's something that I found is enormously beneficial, especially if you're someone who is dealing with a lot of stress or you have anxiety issues. Again, this is the single most powerful practice I've found for taking control of your nervous system and retraining it, learning the skill set of how to consciously relax your brain and nervous system. It also, as I said, recharges the serotonin and dopamine system of the brain, which is incredibly important for energy levels as well as mood. And it's a very powerful practice for combating anxiety. It's also incredible for training sleep. For anybody who struggles with sleep, yoga nidra actually is called yogic sleep. We're inducing a very unique state of consciousness where the brain and the body essentially shut down. If you've never experienced this, it's actually pretty remarkable to experience it. It's a totally unique state of consciousness where your brain actually enters into delta waves, which is mimicking deep sleep, but you're actually in a state of, you're still fully awake. So it's this very special state of physiology that you can do, and you can learn how to train yourself to guide your physiology into. There's also another bonus of a 20-minute guided energizing breathwork practice, which is a mix of many different kinds of breathwork that's highly energizing to your system. And there's also just a fun shamanic meditative breathwork practice that we've built into this too, just to keep things novel. And for anybody who's into more spiritual exploration or meditation, that's a really fun practice that I think you're going to love. And another bonus, should be bonus 3 actually. It is elite level 20 to 30 minute guided intermittent hypoxic training practices to take you to basically Navy SEAL level. Okay, these are very advanced practices. They're long and they have multi-minute breath holds. And this is for anybody who is healthy and fit and strong, and they're already energetic and they're looking to take their energy and their performance to new heights. It's a really fun practice and a great way to challenge yourself. Bonus number 4 is a video with me where I take you through how I do these practices personally, where I layer them with some other tools like yogic bandhas, which help pump cerebrospinal fluid, or there's a more sort of spiritual and esoteric side to that as well, where they're talking about moving chi and those kinds of things. But physiologically speaking, these move cerebrospinal fluid and blood and oxygen throughout your body in really profound ways, and especially up to the brain. And you learn how to take control over muscles of your body that rarely get worked, like in your pelvic floor. And one of my absolute favorite things that I've only discovered in the last 6 months is specific posture practices that pair amazingly well with these breathing practices, with the intermittent hypoxic training. And when you do these practices, you put your body in these different positions and do the practice during that, you really open up the fascia, open up the ligaments, and help massively improve your spinal posture. So if you're someone who sits a lot, you work a desk job, you work at a computer for many hours a day, it's likely that you don't have great spinal posture, and you probably have back or neck pain chronically. And this is the single most powerful way I've found, other than my brother's program, the Pain Fix Protocol. But this is the most powerful way I've found personally to improve my spinal posture, is pairing these specific exercises with the intermittent hypoxic training. So you are going to get all of those in the program, in the Breathing for Energy program. You get all of those tracks, not just one of them, everything I just covered, plus you get an unconditional 30-day money-back guarantee. So you get to go through the entire program for 30 days, try it out. If you don't see massive improvements in terms of increased energy levels and decreased anxiety, you get your money back, no questions asked. I am a full believer in this. I guarantee it. You are going to see big improvements in your life, in your energy, in your well-being, in your mood, in terms of reduced stress, reduced anxiety in your brain and nervous system. And it's going to make a massive difference in your quality of life. And I'm simply guaranteeing that. I want you guys to be completely risk-free in trying this out and getting these results for yourself. And if for some reason you don't, or if you don't love it, no worries. Just send us an email. We'll give you your money back. And no harm, no foul. You didn't lose anything in the process. So there is nothing to lose here and so much to gain. Again, this is the single most powerful way I've ever found to take control of your physiology, to get rid of anxiety, and to increase your energy levels. Plus, it has a whole bunch of added benefits as far as immune health and some of those adaptations that I talked to you about as far as intermittent hypoxic training and beefing up the body's resilience to low oxygen states, which has enormous relevance right now. So here's what you get in the program. You get the advanced breathing science module with me. The value is $200. You get the chronic fatigue fix track from Patrick, $200 value. You get the sleep fix track, which is valued at $100. You get the rewire your brain out of chronic stress and anxiety track, which is valued at $100. You get the advanced energy training track, which is $100. And you get the 6 levels of guided intermittent hypoxic training practices, fully video and guided with music, that took a lot of effort and time to produce. The value is $300. You get the 4 amazing bonuses, all valued at $300, and the total value of everything is $1,300. And it is truly that valuable. That is how much love and effort and energy and time and money we have put into producing this program. It is truly the best program on the market for increasing energy levels and combating fatigue and learning how to rewire your physiology and rewire your nervous system for optimal breathing, for optimal energy, for optimal relaxation and calm. This stuff is profoundly life-changing, and it is absolutely worth every penny. But right now, during this launch, you're going to get everything I just talked about for only $297 instead of $1,300. So the price is going to go up to $497 as soon as we're done with this launch in a few days. So this is your opportunity to get 40% off the normal price and get it at the only time we're going to offer this price of $297. So get in on this offer. Let me make this available for you to purchase. Now that offer should be available for you, and you can click that button to buy now and purchase. Get the program, and you can get started right away, and you can get access to this material. You can get access to all of Patrick's different tracks. You can get access to my content, and you can get access to the fully guided intermittent hypoxic training practices so you can get started. This is very, very easy stuff. Okay, I went very in depth on a whole bunch of science. Some of the science may feel complex and overwhelming, but this is actually something that can take only a few minutes a day, and you can see huge changes in your life. Just think back to that one study I showed you in high school students, where they had them do 3 times a week of training for just 5 minutes, only 5 minutes, total of 15 minutes per week. And they showed huge reductions, 30+% improvement in CO2 tolerance, CO2 threshold, as well as big reductions in anxiety, just from 15 minutes a week. So it's very simple. It's very easy. You don't have to purchase anything once you're in there. There's no fancy technology. There's no upsells. There's no other purchases you need to make. You're just learning how to hack into your own nervous system and control your own physiology.